Pleasure to see and meet you all. Looking forward to hearing your story.
Awesome. Give it one more second for everybody to show up, and then I can kind of get into the intro here. Thank you all for joining us so far today. Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our SBIR to Series A webinar. My name is Tyler Foley. I work for a company called BMNT. We're based out of BMNT, and we also have a footprint in Palo Alto. A little bit of background on us. We're a strategy and innovation consultancy that works exclusively with the government and primarily for the DoD. Part of that work centers around helping companies navigate federal funding opportunities. We work with agencies in the DoW to connect cutting edge technologies and companies with government partners who actually need what they're building. The reason that we've launched this webinar today is because we believe that there's a persistent misunderstanding that government funding and venture capital don't mix, that taking SBIR money somehow makes you less attractive to investors or locks you into a slow bureaucratic pathway. We believe that the reality is different. The smartest founders that we were working with are using SBIR strategically. They're extending runways, de-risking expensive R&D, and positioning themselves more attractively to investors, not less. Before we jump into things today, a little bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded and will be shared out with all attendees. Please use the Q&A function for questions throughout. We'll address as many as we can at the end. And we'll also be launching a couple of polls to understand who's here and whether or not your thinking evolves during our conversation. By the end of today, our goal is that you have a better understanding of how to position government funding in your investor conversations, understand real timelines and expectations for the SBIR process, and get some actionable advice on how you can implement that immediately. So with that through, I'd like to introduce our founder panel. We have three companies here today that have successfully navigated the SBIR and venture funding journey. We have Carl Stedman, who's the founder and CEO of Pulse Space, Ed Lovelace, the Chief Technology Officer at Ampere, Dr. Jeremy Ward, the VP of Products and Partnerships at Vigilife, and Kevin Durkee, the Principal Scientist and Deputy Director of Aptima. These founders represent different stages, sectors, and approaches, but all have figured out how to make government and private funding work together effectively. So I'll turn it over to them to give a little bit of introduction and background on themselves. And then if you would jump in, gentlemen, to talking about how you found SBIR in the first place. What was the opportunity that kind of piqued your interest, and then your actual journey down that pathway? So Carl, if we could start with you.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Carl Stedman. I'm the founder and CEO of Pulse Space. We've had a very atypical journey on the SBIR side of the equation, but the company is building large-scale lasers in orbit for power, space situational awareness, and debris remediation. And then on the DoD side, we are finalizing a phase 2 and finalizing a Strat-5 for a full-scale vehicle to go up in 2027. But as we dive into this a little bit more, we viewed SBIR primarily as a secondary funding mechanism that allows us to de-risk outside of dilutional VC capital. But I'll get into that later. Pass it over to either Ed or Jeremy.
Sure, I'll go next. So Ed Lovelace here. I'm the CTO, VP of Engineering at Ampere. We're an electrified aviation company developing electrified propulsion in particular. Our first part of our roadmap is hybrid electric powertrains and the high voltage energy storage systems that go with them. And our launch product, you can see right here, is going to be a hybrid electric upfit kit for a Cessna Caravan. So that'll enter the market as a supplemental type certificate system. SBIR wise, personally, I think the first SBIR proposal I wrote was 25 years ago. But with Ampere, we've likewise used it as a way to build first functional prototypes or advance to the next stage of maturity, some technology that we've developed without having to be concerned with dilution.
Well, very good. I'll take it from there. Can I confirm you can hear me? Thumbs up from somebody. Great. Thank you, Carl. I'm Jeremy Ward, not a medical doctor, but a doctor in physics with Vigilife, leading products and partnerships here. At Vigilife, we develop a connected health and safety platform that pairs with third-party wearables, ranging from environmental sensors to Garmin smartwatches, things that might be on your wrist. Origin story was with the United States Air Force and the Air Force Research Lab, which is actually where I am from prior to joining Vigilife, after spending some time on Capitol Hill and on the flight line, actually, of F-16s and C-130s. For us, SBIR really has come into 3 phases. I've got a partner of ours, Kevin Durkee, on the line from Aptima as well, and you'll be able to hear 2 different perspectives. Aptima is primarily a research and development organization supporting the U.S. government in a variety of ways. And the product that Vigilife leads and deploys started as an SBIR product demonstrator out of Aptima, and we have spun that technology out as an independent company, Vigilife. And then Vigilife has had its own SBIR legs, where we were able to convert from a prototype, which is very different than a scalable, sustainable product, especially in the software space. And so the SBIR program has allowed us to make that transition. And then we also do a little bit of hardware development, while our venture capital investment has been dedicated to the core software development. We've been able to continually risk reduce some of the hardware development that we are needing to do. Happy to get into why. Using SBIR and more broadly government resources. So we are based out of Dayton, Ohio, adjacent to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is part of the origin story. So pleasure to meet you all. Happy to dig into some concepts here.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you all. I want to jump into a little bit about how you found the opportunity in the first place. I know, Kevin, Carl, you have a pretty unique way that you found SBIR, and the way that you looked at kind of applying for government funding. Ed, you come from a background of having worked with multiple SBIRs throughout the years. So if we could talk a little bit about kind of the process by which, in the current company that you're working for, you thought about SBIR and how you actually pursued that in the first place. Oh, looks like you're on mute there, Carl.
That would help. Thank you. How Pulse started the process and going through SBIRs it was pretty simple. We joined Techstars about a year and a half ago because we wanted to have a better inroad into specifically Space Force, Air Force, etc. But we were completely novice. Like, we had no idea what we were doing, how to submit, how to do any of that stuff. And we got a little bit of help from the team over at Techstars on what to do and who to submit and how to go about that process. And for the last 2 years, we've really been, I guess, hitting it hard from a non-traditional route. Our first contract with the DoD was a micro purchase to get our TS clearance in order to push it through as fast as possible. And then that led us to the path to a StratFi, and a prereq of that StratFi was a phase 2. So it was completely backwards. But we just started going through the process, talking to the individuals we needed to, getting the support we needed to from a Pentagon level all the way down, and then really diving into what needed to happen in order to execute on the larger scale StratFi. We did submit a couple phase twos earlier in the process. Learned a lot from that I guess rejections, if you will. And that really started to hit home on the fact that we can use some of the phase twos and above as non-dilutional research, if you will, on various segments of the company's technology development path, more so than anything else. But we've moved to going from the SBIR side of the equation to what it looks like from a program of record side of the equation, because that's where our primary focus is going to now. We still have to execute on the contracts that are both coming, and we have obviously, but we're shifting our focus to that direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. You when we originally spoke, you had talked about how you were not originally going for SBIR funding, but found your way there or your way there organically, and also had a little bit of an impact on how the SBIR was kind of formulated in the first place through talking with some of the individuals over on the government side. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when we start talking about the capital side of the equation, obviously non-dilutional capital, even if it's viewed as slower, it really depends on what the situation you're in. It really helps on reducing risk from an institutional investment level. That allows investors to start actually wrapping their heads around what can go forward faster. But how we really dealt with the capital side of the equation is, again, we did everything backwards. It was really, let me restate that. We found out from the conversations that we had with the DoD and going through the processes that if you're not actively involved in dictating the requirements for a submission, it dramatically reduces your probability of actually getting successful on that submission. So going down that thought process and walking down that route, we really started to turn our focus on to who is actually dictating those requirements. How can we interface with them? How can we figure out what their needs are? And more importantly, how can we provide a solution that's completely integrated so all they have to do is basically flip the switch? Once we started to figure that out, the entire SBIR process really started to change. And that then led to a massive boost in the fundraising side of the equation. So again, it's been completely non-typical. We knew we were getting a Strat 5 before we actually had a phase two. Like, that's extremely abnormal. And that's because we were talking to the decision makers, the PEOs, and then all the individuals that deal with the contract side of the equation, figuring out what they actually needed and provided them a completely integrated solution for their problems. I know that's a little bit roundabout. I'm trying to talk around some of our contractual stuff. But that's the essence of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Jeremy, you seem to kind of agree with getting in early and being able to shift some of the ways that the government is looking at creating a SBIR in the first place. Has that kind of tracked with your experience as well?
Yeah, and having spent some time on the evaluation side and the requirement drafting side within the Air Force Research Lab, it's critical but very challenging. I don't know what your experience was, Carl, in terms of finding those individuals and finding those pockets that are drafting those requirements, those opportunities, especially in the moving landscape of the SBIR and within the Air Force, the AFWERX paradigm. So yeah, I think it's key, but I think it's not non-trivial. And segue briefly into the Vigilife story. It was actually a great stimulus for us to have multi-organizational partnering. So the early days was partnerships with Lockheed Martin, APTMA, and the Air Force Research Lab. Lockheed Martin obviously could not participate formally in the SBIR, and so that was part of the pathway to APTMA being able to lead this effort. So I don't know, in terms of Vigilife finding opportunities, the advent of AFWERX structuring FFP contracts, where you don't have to have the same time and material-based cost accounting system as a small startup that we don't have. That is what made SBIRs possible for us to play in, is that shift to FFP structured milestone-driven contracts. Those are the ones that we as a small startup can go after and compete for. And then when it comes to more of the traditional SBIRs or other government opportunities, I'll hand it over to Kevin to talk a little bit on how they approach SBIRs and source them.
Yeah, hi, this is Kevin Durkee. I'll go ahead and go off camera for a second. I'm just here to support Jeremy with the flip side of our unique sort of business model here with Aptima, more of a traditional R&D government contractor, and VigilLife as our spin-off affiliate company to commercialize to the private sector. There's a couple different ways that could answer how we use SBIRs. To be honest, we've used SBIRs in a lot of different ways. Jeremy just alluded to really how VigilLife got founded, how the Safeguard product got launched originally was that was the sequence of events where Aptima had actually developed some foundational technology years ago. I mean, we're going back to about 2010, as far back as then, 15 years ago, where we had some technology that was developed under SBIR that was really more, at that time, SBIRs were probably much more commonly research lab flavored, whereas now I would argue they're more transition flavored than ever. So at the time, we had some great data analytics and technology using wearable sensors, which at that time were nothing like they are now. But flash forward to about 2015, Lockheed Martin was our partner at the time, Lockheed Martin Aeronautics. They had some operational customers with the Air Force air logistics complexes where they had a strong interest and need in doing remote safety monitoring. And Lockheed kind of brokered that arrangement where they realized, hey, we had the core technology at Aptima. They had the customer with the operational need. Let's put this together into a solution. So they basically took SBIR technology that we had developed at Aptima and then layered on what it just so happens the funding they had available was SBIR also. So we did phase 2.5 contracts. Much like TACFIs are today through AFWERX, this was commercialization readiness program funding. So we did a second phase 2 essentially to turn that into what was essentially like a TRL 5 to 6 product into a TRL 7 to 8 product that was a lot more ready to go operationally. And yes, we worked with the operational customers throughout that program, which took a few years. And really what came out of that was a fieldable solution that we realized had commercial potential, and that's what founded VigilLife. So that's a couple different uses of SBIRs that I alluded to there. One being a lot more kind of laboratory focused, the other was more transition focused. But nowadays, the SBIR landscape has changed a lot. The way we approach them now, for a variety of different reasons, partly out of necessity and the goals of the program, the way it's morphed over the years. We use them to really supplement our offerings and to supplement our non-SBIR work. So Aptima used to be, years ago, we used to be probably over 50% SBIR funded. Now we're about 20, maybe less than 20% funded, and probably within the next 1 to 2 years we'll be close to zero. We've grown enough, and the SBIR rules are changing enough to where we're not even positive we'll be able to participate in the program anymore. So we're largely using it to supplement offerings today, leading with the transition focused work that we do now more so, and using it to fund kind of more innovation, higher risk work to help support our ongoing customers. So.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to talk about that a little bit more too. Ed, I know that you have a lot of experience over the years talking or going through different SBIR processes. If you could talk about how the process has changed over time and then the differences that you see in the different SBIR offices and what makes it some more attractive than others for your specific purposes, what you're looking for as you're kind of going between the Army and the Navy or NASA, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've certainly done a number of projects for Department of War, Department of Defense, NSF, Department of Energy, and a couple others connected with the SBIR programs. And writ large, they have evolved over the last several decades to be more customer focused, which I think is all for the better. Um, I would say if I go back 3 decades or more, it was, I won't say almost exclusively, but much more heavily bent towards, um, non-dilutive de-risking R&D funding. So the various R&D labs in the different portions of the government had identified its strategic areas of interest, and put out calls for sometimes very specific, sometimes more broad topics to help bring some good ideas to light through enough funding to get first functional prototypes done. I mean, what's happened though over the last 10 to 15 years, I'd say, at least in my experience, mostly led by the Air Force, is really tying it much more to the customer end with AFRL and the advent of AFWorks and them getting requirements really from end users and customers within the Department of War to really drive some of the topics. Um, and furthermore, in some of the more recent applications that are connected with even direct to phase twos, but also TAC-FIs and STRAT-FIs, they have a customer and end user requirement in order to even apply for those opportunities. But that I think has all been for the better, because it's really driven small businesses to sort of focus on delivering needs and thinking about sort of the path to, what's the end product that this technology might be able to fit in. So still today, there's 3 flavors. There's the de-risking R&D prototyping type of opportunities where the government might not be a direct customer. You might have mostly commercial customers. The second flavor is dual use, where your company might have a primary commercial opportunity, but sees some synergy with needs in the government. And then the third one is the one I think you've heard more about, particularly from Carl, where their primary customer and their primary entry point was working with the military who had a direct need, and then determining that SBIR was the most sufficient contracting mechanism to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really great. You covered a lot of it, and I think a key portion there is as the SBIR program transitions, they're looking for some of those there's some of those companies that currently have customers or are thinking about the different ways that they can commercialize. I know, Kevin, you have some experience with that recently, and we've talked about how you're trying to change the pie chart of your revenue and go shift from what you're taking from government grants over to what you're taking from commercial customers. Could you talk about how, as you've moved through the SBIR program, it's given you a different understanding when you're walking into pitching yourself for private capital or for different types of customers?
Yeah, I'll let Jeremy kind of touch on the private capital portion of that. But yeah, as for within government customers specifically, that's really where my and the Aptima focus is. Yeah, I kind of alluded to it in my previous discussion. I think it touches on some of the things Ed just talked about as well. We've really had to shift our mindset over the years at Aptima to going towards, you have to look at the end user organization first and really where are their pain points, where are their mission needs, and really have that transition plan for the technology on day one before you even jump in. We've actually found increasingly, if you don't have that, the project is kind of doomed to fail, or it's just gonna kind of fizzle, and you're not left with much at the end other than something that sits on the shelf and is probably not going to get much funding after that. So we really want to make that funding count because it's really valuable funding. You get to build up your own technology and retain the intellectual property. So you want to make it count. And so for example, like one great use case we've had has been working with Navy shipyards for monitoring some of their facilities and confined spaces, areas where there's hazardous chemicals, materials, and they need to do a better job detecting those things. We've been working with a few of the Navy shipyards on a non-SBIR basis for a couple years now. But we've had one instance very recently where an SBIR opportunity, it was an open topic from the Navy. We said, hey, this is a great opportunity to take some of the great ideas that they've had that we haven't had funding for, the customer has not had funding for at the shipyards. But this was funding that frankly they didn't have to pay for. They just have to sort of endorse it and work with us collaboratively on the SBIR effort. So that was kind of a win-win for everybody. We like to think that was a good use of the intent of the SBIR program. So it's a win for them. It's a win for us because we get some technology development funding out of it. And it's a win for our customer at the shipyards because they've got ideas they didn't have funding for. So that I think is a great modern use of SBIRs. And we'd like to do more of that in the time that we do have left with the SBIR program while we're still eligible. Jeremy, I'll maybe turn it to you for any insights on the private capital side.
Yeah, when we originally spun out, we were almost exclusively government funded and venture capital funded, very limited, zero commercial revenue out of the gate. And we knew that we wanted to be on a 2 to 3 year timeline to shift the pie chart from heavy government investment as keeping the lights on to commercial revenue. One challenge that has created as we pursue venture additional kind of growth capital is that it is challenging to find, I'll call it government friendly or dual use friendly venture capital teams that understand the role and appreciate the role of select government programs. And then another challenge that it's created as we've gone into additional fundraising is our top line revenue is a mix of project R&D revenue and commercial revenue, and it can look fairly high at times with some of those grants. And we have to unpack and dissect what is actually that, for us as a software company, that annual reoccurring revenue, or the ARR, which is a primary metric that we're evaluated against when we go to fundraise. And so it has created a challenge where you might see level year-over-year funding, but then one layer deeper when we unpack what portion of that is commercial product-centered revenue relative to the total pie. We've shifted that from about 100% government revenue, project-based revenue, towards we're probably 80% commercial at this point, which has present challenges, but also adds some stability in times like we're experiencing right now. So kind of back to you, Tyler, and we can go any deeper on any topics there.
Yeah, definitely. I want to make sure that we have some time for Q&A at the end, and then I do want to bring in Felix at some point. But to kind of close out what we've got going on here, I'd like to kind of have you all talk about the practical lessons that you've learned. Things like what would your advice be to a founder that's never written a SBIR before, doesn't have any experience with the program, or some walking traps that you can fall into once you're coming out of a SBIR and looking to get real customers and take on private capital?
I mean, sure, I'll start. I'll make a few bullet point comments for somebody who's never done one before. Don't overthink the application. They typically outline exactly what they want to see in the application, and more pages doesn't make a better application. Just answer exactly what they want. You've got reviewers that are going to spend a minimum amount of time reviewing your application. So you want to clearly put in order the things they asked for, put it in the same order if possible in your proposal. So it's very easy for them to score each element they're supposed to evaluate it on. That's just a basic nuts and bolts thing. You know, beyond that, I would say if you don't have a commercial use for the results of this R&D funding, it's really important to get connected to the government customers for this product. Sometimes you might have a commercial use for what comes out of that SBIR, but if you don't start very early trying to make those connections, and it's not always easy. Like if you are not somebody who used to work for AFRL and now you're in a private company, you may not have that Rolodex. You know, use your TPOC for the SBIR as a starting point. But that's a case where you honestly may want to bring in some consultants to help you find out who the real decision makers and the people who control budgets are.
That's great advice, Ed. I'll bounce a little bit off that and talk about how do you actually engage with PEOs, especially if you're a brand new company like we were without any contacts. How we went about that process, again, we look at this kind of backwards. We look at interfacing with the individuals that are creating the requirements, establishing relationships with them, and then actually going through the process of filling out the application, exactly like you said, answer the questions that need to be answered. But if you don't have a Rolodex of individuals and you're not from the military like me and now, well, was some of my team, now we're starting to really dive into the network side of the equation. What we did was pretty simple. We got who our ultimate end customer would be. We got their name. And then we started basically banging on every single door we possibly could, whether that was at conferences, whether that's through social media like LinkedIn. We really just pounded the pavement. And every single time we had the ability to have a meeting with someone that was not the end goal, but on the path towards that end goal, we started asking questions. We asked them what they need, what they want, how their processes would be easier, how our product would help them make either decisions easier or help them with their ultimate objectives, and then ask them who they can actually refer us to ultimately get to where we needed to be, which is in our case, space combat power and space domain awareness within Space Force. It was about a 6-month process to really get from the lieutenant colonel level to the colonels and ultimately multiple star generals in the Pentagon. And then last but not least, we realized very early on that the military is not very good at aggregating things together. So what we really wanted to focus on was providing a singular solution to one of the most difficult problems they were facing. Once we started to dive into that and really address the technical aspects, that then completely inverted that entire process of reaching out to people saying, you need to talk to this person, this person, this person, and then our network of tree just exploded. So the two things is do and talk to whoever you possibly can initially and make sure you're solving for a very large problem and providing a full solution, not just a part of that solution, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's
Great.
great advice. And then as you kind of move out of a SBIR and look into private capital, Jeremy, is there any big bear traps that you've fallen into or have seen others fall into that you'd like to warn others against?
Well, I'll say we are 90% software, but we do a little bit of hardware development, and it's been a lot easier to pitch and be successful with hardware-centered projects. And they just seem to have a physical, tangible thing that people can rally around when they're evaluating. And we have had less success. It's been more challenging to be awarded on software-centered innovations that we think are equally as valuable, if not more valuable, or really the epicenter of our company. So that's one. Hardware has been more successful for us in the SBIR space. And then as we've gone more commercial, what we have found is that the requirements for scale of a software, whether it's for cybersecurity, privacy, or general architecture, The disconnect between one good example is a serverless architecture for scalability into the private sector relative to containerized solutions being a very kind of exciting direction in the government right now. And that disconnect creates some challenges and complexities as we try to create a very commercially focused company that is also serving the government using modern best practices across both privacy, security, and scale. And so that's something that is constantly on our mind as we continue to try to go, Carl, as you mentioned, gravitate from SBIR to more programs of record. We can usually satisfy most of the requirements at the SBIR with a really strong, healthy overlap between commercial and government. But as we get closer and closer to programs of record that are leveraging the tools that we've developed, that overlap gets less and less and gets a little bit more challenging to support both.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you guys so much. We'll bring you on a little bit later to talk through the Q&A and then interact with Felix a little bit after we kind of hear from him. But I'd like to introduce Felix Bustos. He's worked at DIU for about 15 years before launching off on his own venture as a general partner at Startup Deck Ventures, where they focus on dual-use technologies. He's got a unique perspective as somebody that looks at both government-backed companies and also works with founders like Carl through their SBIR journey. So, Felix, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, great. Everyone can hear me, right? Thumbs up, Tyler. Well, first off, I just want to say thank you, Tyler. Thanks to BMNT, great group of individuals, amazing. Help you navigate the complexities of what is government contracting. That being said, so background, so served active duty 5 years and transitioned to the reserves for 16 years, spent 4 years at the Defense Innovation Unit. I was at a combatant command one day. Our CO said, you got to work at DIU. It's been amazing. It was supposed to be a 1-year tour, ended up being 4. And I've recently retired. So great to be here. And so real quick, I was a founder at one point. So not too long ago, and still am in many ways. So I completely understand the pain that everyone is going through. Being a founder is painful from a commercial standpoint. And now you're adding another layer, the government. So that's double pain, right? So I completely understand it. We're here for you. StarDeck was founded by people who understand the pain. So and Alexa McCullough, we're both, in terms of background, share the same background, aerospace and defense. So what we do quickly at StarDeck is we invest in frontier space technologies and dual-use systems that define Space 3.0 infrastructure and beyond. And our mission is to fund bold tech leaders shaping 3.0. So real quick, just a quick history on Space 3.0. I know we have a lot to cover, Tyler, so I'll go through this real quick just to lay the groundwork. Space 1.0 is publicly funded from a funding standpoint. Well, let's not even get into the technology. So think about like the early missions, Apollo missions, and then transition quite nicely to Space 2.0. So the SpaceX type of Virgin Galactic, Virgin Orbit, and others. And now we have Space 3.0. So think of it as a partnership, a true partnership, as it's evolving from public and private capital funding. So we're in an amazing spot to be. So Tyler, back to you.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a perfect transition into where I wanted to start this conversation. And it's your reaction to companies that have government funding. In Space 3.0, it's talking about this public-private partnership and working together. And so as you've seen it transition over time into this new era, how do you receive companies that have government funding? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so we don't shy away from, and then there's different flavors of VCs. I think one of you, I think Jeremy alluded to the fact that some VCs are more government funding friendly, some are not so much, and some are halfway in the middle. And you're seeing more of a shift. When I was at DIU, there was a clear group that would not fund, and there was a group that would fund. Now you're seeing a transition. So that's a pretty good spot to be. And there are those that are just strictly commercial. So I'll start off with that. And from a STAR deck perspective, the way we look at government funding, it's not a bad thing. And that's the obvious answer. And I'll take a quick deep dive because it is very good from a GP LP standpoint. From an investment standpoint, that's non-dilutive capital. So you're doing two things essentially. You're de-risking tech, which is amazing. And you could go through the different flavors, the different phases of SBIR from phase one, phase two, even phase three. And now you have more of the more innovative type that Carl alluded to, TACFI, tactical funding increase, and StratFi. So those are things that would actually accelerate the whole process, more significant funding, and then transition that to a true program of record. And that's the end goal. So we look at it as a way to show a strong demand signal from a true customer, right? And then they walk away with a pretty solid cap table, maybe just a few percentages diluted with angels and all the pre-seed type of investors. But at the end of the day, the way we look at it, it has been inherently de-risked from a technological standpoint and from a clear path to a true revenue standpoint. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I'm happy to talk with your VCs on the line, happy to evangelize that even more.
Yeah, definitely. Does it matter to you if they're trying to pursue the government as their primary customer or if they're looking to...
That's a really, that question has come up many, many times. There's no one size fits all rule. I'll give a classic case study example. Drones are amazing, right? Back then it was like made for movies, like whatever, right? It was so cool. And that transitioned quite nicely to dual use tech. So that's more of, if you're looking at I think Jeremy was alluding, the pie, right? That could evolve into a good percentage, right? And then the goal really of the founder is to optimize their market share. Now for Carl, I hope you don't mind if we kind of pull the thread on your, when you look at it, by default, it will slant quite quickly to a strictly DOW type of play, right? So what I'm trying to say is, as a founder, you have to sit back and understand the landscape, and be really honest with yourself and your team. Is this truly can you split that pie? Can you optimize that pie? Or is it truly at the end of the day, like Carl, that's why it was kind of backwards. It wasn't, it's brilliant, right? He listened to the end user and realized there's that bigger piece of pie on the DOW side. So that's there's and find VCs and advisors like BMNT. That's a plug for you guys to understand that landscape.
Well, we appreciate it. And kind of going off of the idea that there's no one size fits all, and evaluating yourself and your core customer, what are other things that you look for in a company to pitch themselves? How should they represent what they've done so far over on the government side, whether it's with SBIR or with other alternate customers? How should they be positioning themselves?
Yeah, so they have to start with understanding what the pain point is. That's it, Steve Blank. We all love Steve Blank, right? So the most successful founders actually understand that. I've met many, many really smart, some of the smartest people in the world. They have, because they went through a lab, their PhD, they love their prototype, right? So it's trying to find a home for this amazing breakthrough technologies. Now, but fact of the matter is, some technologies can transition. They can be components, they're subsystems, right? That could find a home in a full system like Carl's system, or at the end of the day, it will probably fizzle out because the connection between a true need from a requirement standpoint and an existing prototype needs to match. So that being said, a founder needs to, and then this is more like at the tactical level, really understand how they're going to utilize SBIR, right? So SBIR phase one, I'll go through it real quick. Each department, each agency is different. I'm going to talk about more of like NASA and SpaceWorks, for example. A SBIR phase one is really to understand think of it as like paid business development, right? So to build those relationships, to understand who the program executive office folks are, to understand who the technical point of contacts are, to understand how the acquisition process is in that type of branch or agency. When you transition to a phase two, now you're talking about, okay, what are the milestones? What are the deliverables? What are the things that you're truly developing from a prototyping standpoint? And sometimes you have the solution and you can fast track and then end up with an actual complete solution. And then that's where you see the biggest difference between founders who get stuck in SBIR land. Right now, that's changing. There's a lot of information going out there. Please do not make SBIR your bread and butter. Use it, utilize it as a way to, like phase one, understand who the customer is. It ranges. Let's pick on, for example, Spaceworks, 75K ish for SBIR. Use that as BD. Transition quite quickly to a phase two. Either you're postured for a direct to phase two, or there's a specific topic for phase two. And then your goal is to get to, depending on the agency or branch, transition to like a TAC-FI, tactical funding increase, or STRAT-FI. That's where it gets really interesting for the folks on the VC side, because now the government incentivizes us to match the amount. So TAC-FI, last counted roughly 2 million. STRAT-FI is amazing. That's a whopping 30 million. And then the goal is to transition nicely to a program of record.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of transitioning off, don't get stuck in SBIR land. What are some red flags that you see that founders take large missteps when coming out of?
Not having a clear roadmap. So think of it as, and this is really for the founders on this webinar, have a clear path to what your technical roadmap would look like. But start like what, Carl, understand what the pain points are, right? So work your way backwards, but understand what the technical roadmap would look like, and then embed funding streams in terms of non-dilutive, so SBIR, so very clear. Okay, we have a clear understanding of what the end user might need, and then say at this point, we're going to utilize when a SBIR 1 meet all the alphabet, so TPOC, PEO, all that, acquisition types, and all the acronyms that come with it, who you're working with, but understand that and have people associated to those acronyms, and then have another milestone that talks about, okay, phase two, these are the deliverables, right? And work with those people to understand what deliverables, what do you expect? But the end goal should always be a full system. Now, sometimes you can't transition to a full system because you were a very smart, brilliant PhD who developed a subsystem. That is very important. Now the question is, how can I work with other key players, either a Prime, a Lockheed, or more mature startups, and then they can facilitate work with space is a very complex problem in any technology, but find your place in that whole ecosystem. Can you truly grow up and become a full system, or because you're amazing in developing a subsystem, inherently your subsystem solves a problem for a Prime or a more mature type of startup?
Yeah, that's really great. I'd like to kind of use that as an opportunity to bring everybody back in and talk through some of the things that you heard, Felix, and then open it up to see if there was any questions from Jeremy, Carl, or Ed on the types of things that we had just spoke about.
I mean, no specific questions, but I'll just tee off something that Felix was saying. So as an example, the Department of War, they generally don't buy powertrains, hybrid electric powertrains for the electric powertrains. They buy aircraft, they buy gensets, they buy APUs, they buy onboard power systems for mission equipment. So we definitely have to think about that when we're trying to engage with the customers in the military, that they need they really need a complete solution. So whether we're doing that directly or finding the right military contractor to partner with to get our systems on board, something they may already have in a program of record. That's definitely something we're thinking about.
Tyler, can I ask a question? I know some like what keeps you up at night as founders, right? Carl, I know you don't sleep, so I know anyway, or Jeremy or Ed, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, one is on our end, it's the roadmap is large and full of excitement and passion and opportunity, and bringing that to reality with growing at the pace of relevance, right? So there's government traction, there's commercial traction, and constantly trying to decide whether or not a particular government opportunity is worth going at because it strengthens the commercial position, or is it a distraction to the commercial position? So we are commercial first, but a strong commitment to government and defense support. One of the challenges that we're seeing over the past 12, 18 months has been, I can't imagine where we would be at if we were a government-only funded company, or primarily because the changing landscape and the changing requirements and the uncertainty of all that, I'm very glad that we had that buffer of stability of venture capital funds. So we've been able to extend our seed round to almost 2 years, or 2 years longer than we would have through non-dilutive capital. And so that is something that helps me sleep at night. But as the climate is changing, so is the recipe for continuing to have some of that non-dilutive opportunity at least within our area.
Yeah, that's great. And commercial, actually, when just briefly on being on the other side, when we were looking at companies, especially early stage, we want to at my past life at the DIU always really looked into not just in terms of military utility, but either having a commercial revenue stream, existing commercial revenue stream, or a clear path to that, because that kind of helps the founder and the team during tough times, like what we're going through right now. And hopefully it'll end soon. So that would be great for everyone in the ecosystem. Yeah, Carl or Ed?
So what keeps me up at night? I'm going to go back to that question real quick. Two things. We need to hire at a very fast rate over the next 12 to 18 months to deliver on the timelines we have spoken about with our PEOs and our sponsors, the capabilities they want that are driven by geopolitical situations. That's number one. The second thing that keeps me up is how do we go from a CUI level on our security systems in that regard to above TS and the timelines that we have to actually deal with all of this, not only innovation, solving some engineering problems, but actually production on the prototypes, and then start to look into scaling on a scale, or manufacturing on a scale, and dealing with all those requirements from secure information, processes and systems training, all of that stuff. Because again, when we started our process a year ago with the DOW, we were 100% commercial. Like, we're very strong commercially, and we are now rapidly trying to catch up to what we need to do in order to fulfill what we're building on the timelines that we're building. So I guess the hyperscaling side of the equation and then the security side of the equation are the two biggest things that really keep us up. And to add to that, those are good problems to have. If those are the problems that you have, it means you have product market fit, and those contracts that are coming in then allow you to go out and raise capital from the private markets at a much more beneficial dilution percentage, if you will. So I'm not super losing sleep over it, but it's definitely something that I'll wake up at 2 a.m. and be like, okay, we need to do this, this, and this. And then give my son a hug and then go back to sleep.
Yeah, great. That's great, Carl. Just food for thought. So we're all in terms of if you're pursuing government contracts, you're always asked the question, what is your technology readiness level? And if you're a good founder, you know exactly what your TRL is, right? One thing to think about, Carl, as you've won and will continue to win, and this goes for everyone on the call that have successfully won government contracts, is the manufacturing readiness level, right? Because sometimes we're stuck in the prototyping phase, and then that's a tough problem to solve. But you have to kind of think about, okay, be a step ahead, two steps ahead. What is my MRL going to look like once we start winning those, bigger contracts, tactical funding increase, strategic funding increase type? Because that if you could truly embed the MRL level in say this is what we're going to use it for, and then there's a clear path to everything that you talked about. That does keep a lot of people up at night. Now you're optimizing, and that looks good from a venture capital standpoint. You get 30 million non-diluted from the government, and then now we're asking, what are you going to use it for? Everything that you talked about. So now we food for thought. Those are things that are green flags, so to speak, versus 30 million, and you're asking for another 30. What are you going to use it for? I have problem like just think more of like from a very from a CapEx, OpEx standpoint. Those are green flags. And then now you can sleep well. Hopefully, Carl. And
Hopefully that does give some people some solace. And I know we're coming up on time here, so I just want to say thank you before we jump into a Q&A. For those that can stay on afterwards, we would really appreciate it. But I just want to say that we'll follow up in the next couple of days with all of the attendees and the recipients with the recording of what was discussed and then a recap of the type of conversation that we've had. And we're having another follow-up event on space investment next Tuesday, the 18th. And for those that live in the Bay Area, we've also got a great networking event Tuesday as well. We'll have both of those registration links. They've both been dropped in the chat. And so if you're interested in the broader funding landscape, we hope to see you there. As we kind of jump into the Q&A, though, that we've gotten throughout, the types of things that have been asked by multiple people at this point, I'd like to kind of start with the big question of, how do you start to build those relationships? If you're not somebody that has an understanding of who your end customer is in government, what PEOs you should talk to, where's a good place to start, and how would you timeline that out so that you can make sure that you're knocking on the right doors in the right sequence and having the right conversations?
I mean, I'll start. I'd say that is the most opaque and hardest part of this process. Actually finding and identifying and applying for and executing SBIRs is much easier than this customer acquisition piece of it. Particularly, again, if you're not coming out of the military yourself. For me, I would say the first place to start is there's tons of events that go on where these people or folks adjacent to them are attending. They're presenting, they're exhibiting, or maybe they're just attending. Start to go to some of the relevant military events. I mean, I'm not suggesting you fill your calendar with these things, but that's a good place to start. And the other place to start is, again, there's a number of consulting groups that specifically work with small technology businesses and the military. You might consider engaging with one of those.
Yeah, I think that's great. Felix, from your point of view as somebody that's kind of worked on both sides of the equation,
yeah.
What's your advice to founders?
Yeah, so recently, and I'll be specific. Like Space Force has done an amazing job in terms of reaching out to industry. In fact, they created different organizations. SpaceWorks is one of them, and even facilities where it's very founder friendly, right? It's a very welcoming environment. So put yourself in those situations wherein you're around the right people because they're there. And then there's different events. Some are really focused on specific topics. Some are more of like, you know, a meet and greet type, right? Like, you know, there's a holiday, you know, season, a bunch of events there. But more importantly, when you're there, be able to um, build trust-based relationships, because you're not going to be able to know exactly who the right person is your first meeting. It's not like there's a person, I am with this office. So not to you know mention your it took some time, Carl, and please correct me if I'm wrong, right? You meet one person and be ready with a quick one line, because on the other side, there were like initial meetings that was not clear what the founder was doing. Now Carl is good at explaining briefly what he does, right? Even if it's a very complex system. So be very clear, so that person that you talk to walks away with something and they know exactly what you're doing, because that would open doors for the next meeting, right? And save those you know 1 hour, 2 hours, sometimes half a day conversations with the right technical point of contact or the right technical SMEs on the team. But that would be very helpful for founders. So it's something more tactical that everyone have that quick, and then just enjoy the meeting, right? Don't bombard them with too much information. They walk away. I don't know what Carl does, right? No, we know what you do. So food for thought. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's actually it's really great and practical advice. I know that it might sound kind of self-explanatory, but especially when you're working with government folks, giving them a soundbite that they can regurgitate at somebody when they might not be the right person that you should have talked to in the first place, but they walk into a conversation 2 or 3 days later and they remember that little piece of information that they're able to convey to the person that you should actually be speaking with in the first place. It's much less targeted than if you're going to a venture capital firm that on their letterhead says exactly they fund companies that are like yours. So we have another one, and one's a little bit more of a mouthful. But for those who have not yet worked directly on SBIR or similar projects, how might you scope a project, building a timeline and work estimate that is appropriate for the time, technical, and fiscal constraints of phase one?
Let me see. I'll do one initial thought on how to answer this. First off, what is the goal of a SBIR phase one? Remember, it's to win phase two. So it's very, very simple. What do you need to do in phase one that is going to help you write the proposal for phase two to win a phase two? That, in my view, that's one good way to frame what you're doing. So, don't feel like you have to in phase one solve or start down the path on every aspect of something that will eventually become a military or commercial product. Think about the one or two or at most three things you want to demonstrate or de-risk that will be the core of what you put into your phase two proposal. All of the just detailed logistical things about creating timelines and detailed tasking plans, you can keep that pretty high level at a phase one proposal. Don't do a 4 deep level project plan.
So I'll add a little bit to that. For how we did it is we knew what our end goal was from a technological development pathway. Then we started to use Gantt charts to work the timelines. Then we took what our SBIR applications and submissions and where they fit into those timelines. And from that, we then derived what our period of delivery is and how we went about it and how multiple different subsystems reducing risk within that overall timeline. So we knew what the end product was. And then we started to fit in different pieces of the puzzle from a SBIR timeline as well. So like we're getting ready to apply for, I think, our last two SBIRs in about a month. and they are for what do I want to say on this? They're for testing and simulation for capabilities that we know we need to incorporate, but are not the primary focus on our first Gen 1 deliverable. So that's how we're thinking about it. Everything fits into the entire design and development and production timeline. I really think that as a founder, you need to have an overarching goal, because we got to remember that SBIRs are just a stepping stone towards something bigger. And I think that gets lost in the wash a lot. So by having an overarching vision and then working yourself back to where you currently are and where certain submissions can plug into that pathway is really key.
Awesome. I really appreciate it, guys. I know that we're 5 minutes over at this point, so I don't want to hold everybody for too long. This has been an amazing discussion. I can't thank you enough for joining us today. Like I said to everybody earlier that has stuck on for the attendees, we will be sending out a recap of the things that we've talked about and a recording to go along with this as well. We hope that you have a fantastic rest of your week, and can't thank you enough for joining us. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Tyler.